Welcome to episode 3 of the Rogers TV series special on community diversity and inclusion strategy. Today we'll be talking about priority number 2, having zero tolerance for oppression, discrimination, and ignorance. Today we'll hear from the chair of this priority, Rumina Morris, and I'll be speaking with a few other folks to get their insights on what's been done and what we plan on doing in the future. We're here at the Hive, and I have Rumina Morris here with me. She's chair of priority number 2, to have zero tolerance for oppression, discrimination, and ignorance. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Why did you get involved in this project?
Well, the reason I got involved in the project, I've been in London for about 3 years now, and I moved from the GTA. And when I saw an opportunity to get involved in this community around something that is very dear to me in terms of diversity and inclusion, I put my name forth. I'm a new resident. I'm chosen to raise my children in this community. So I felt like it was a good fit for the values that I have in terms of being a citizen and a resident of London, and then also in line with something that's very important to me, which is to have an inclusive community. So that's why I chose to be a part of this.
So you mentioned it's important to you. Why is it important for Londoners to pay attention to this as well?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, you know, London is a growing city. A lot of people are moving to this community. And as it's growing, there is inclusive, it's necessary to kind of be more inclusive because we're seeing a lot more diversity. We're seeing people from different racialized groups. We see a lot of newcomers to Canada that come to London. And then we also, of course, have a large LGBT community in the city. And then there are people that are navigating the spaces around us because of their abilities. So this affects everybody in terms of keeping it an inclusive society. So it's important because it allows us to sort of think broadly, think bigger than our own particular social location, and think about others in our community and how we can sort of ensure that people feel welcome and feel safe in this city as it's growing and as it is becoming more and more diverse.
Right, yeah, I agree. I've also came from the GTA a few years ago.
That's
and
right.
I think it's really important to participate in community initiatives like this. I mean, we live here, right? Like, we want to live in the best society that we can.
Absolutely.
So I think it's up to each of us to make it that.
Exactly.
So in regards to this specific priority,
Yep.
having zero tolerance for oppression, discrimination, and ignorance, where is it? Like, where are we now?
Well, it's a good question because when we started this project, you know, it was 2017 when the strategy was introduced, and we took on sort of implementation of this work plan about a year ago now. And in that year, so much has changed. As much as the City of London was very much promoting the need for a more inclusive community, the community wasn't necessarily as ready. And obviously, as we know, COVID-19 has happened this year. And then the Black Lives Matter movement in conjunction with that. COVID has definitely shown our community where our vulnerable people are and how they're impacted. So, and then with Black Lives Matter and some very local examples of racism in this community, it's kind of ramped this conversation to the forefront. So as much as people have been embracing the idea of becoming an inclusive community, this is now talking about how we can change the systemic pieces to the city. And so for me, this is a really important way to sort of get engaged, and to eliminate oppression, discrimination, and ignorance is a huge undertaking. But in this moment right now, it is the only thing that we can really focus on because there is so much attention around the globe on this topic. Mm-hmm. And people are ready, the community is ready, and we've also got a lot of support from the City of London to sort of really push this agenda forward. So it's a really good time to sort of get involved and actually take some action.
Right, yeah. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, I mean, a really good example of that is the protest at Vic Park. Back
Yep.
in the summer, like 10,000 people, you know,
Yes.
and like during that whole period of like this global upheaval,
Yes.
like there were, you know, people in their cars were, you know, put stickers on the back of their car, Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Like, you know, that was so reassuring to see.
Absolutely.
So it's good to know that this priority is really taking these things seriously and focusing heavily on them. What is this priority working on in particular, looking ahead? So going forward, what do you plan to do?
Sure. So, I mean, at this point, we are really looking at pivoting our work plan. Our work plan was initially very much in the community, going to festivals, being a part of the community in different ways, engaging with the library, engaging with the school boards, and trying to really get information and awareness out there. And in this very moment, it feels like because of COVID, we have to regroup, but also because of Black Lives Matter and the necessity to address anti-racism. We have a real opportunity here now to sort of pivot, not only because of the need to do things virtually, but also pivot in terms of making sure that our work plan is in alignment with what the community is asking for. So part of our work plan has been things like working with the London Police, which of course has been much of the focus of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of police services. So we are now at a place where we're going to rejig our work plan to really meet the needs of the community and really target on some very clear aspects of oppression and ignorance and discrimination that the community is experiencing and has voiced for many years, but we now need to sort of take that voice and be the tool to implement this change that is needed.
So can you please tell me any sort of concrete, tangible deliverables that have come out of this work?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the most exciting projects that we've been doing with our priority working group is that we're collaborating with City Studio London. And through that project, we're able to enlist the help of research students from Western University who are actually providing us some of the tools that we hope to use as we start moving this into the community and creating that awareness. So the students have been very busy creating some documents that help us to inform the work that we do. Mm-hmm. So that is a very tangible deliverable that we've actually been able to bring back to the community. And then coming up in the next few weeks, we're also doing the same thing with this year's group.
Cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you once again for your time, Rumina.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure. So we'll be speaking more about the City Studio project after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Leora Swartzman, who's a professor of psychology at Western University. Welcome, Leora.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I just
My
have
pleasure.
a few questions to run by you.
Sure.
Can you please speak about the work that your students are doing and how this project sort of came about?
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to take you back to 2017-18, which is when I really first met Kinga, who at that point was quite involved and still is in spearheading the London's community diversity and inclusion strategy. And I was teaching a community psychology course and was looking for projects. And at that point, we ended up, a group of my students wrote a piece on social inclusion. You know, part of this is a diversity and inclusion. What is social inclusion? And so those students wrote a piece on what social inclusion is and isn't. And then in the second year, we got more involved in the community diversity and inclusion strategy piece itself. So one group of students did an analysis of how would we know if this strategy worked? Like, how would London be different? How would we track the outcomes? And another group of students did something on how to provide Londoners the tools to call out discrimination when we see it, so to bypass the bystander effect. So that was the second year. The story about last year is a little interesting because I'm used to, in my community engaged learning courses, for there to be multiple projects, right? Students are working on multiple projects. But Misha Schlemmer, who runs the City Studio, said, each class only gets one project. I met up with Kinga again, and in that room was Kim Solga, and she's a theater studies prof. And as we talked, I realized actually it could be quite interesting to have it. There's certainly plenty in the CDIS strategy for our students to work on. And Kim was thinking about what her students might do, and her course is Performance Beyond Theater. It's the ways students explore the way performance can be used to educate and animate citizens, really sort of more for social justice and action. And after that meeting, Kim and I met together and we decided it would sort of be fun to work together. And the students in the prior year had identified, by interviewing the champions, that there were 4 isms that the champions thought were important to understand. Racism, xenophobia, which is fear of newcomers or immigrants, physical disableism, and saneism. Saneism being discrimination against people who have mental health challenges. We worked on that last year. The mandate was, again, to provide the champions with the information they needed. So my students prepared posters or infographics. And what did they do to get that? Well, they did a lot of library research and looking at what London had information, but they also did qualitative interviews of the champions and learnt firsthand about people's lived experience. What was important for Kim Solga, the theatre studies, is for my students to then give her students information that would really give them a sense of people's lived experience so they could then bring those performances to life. This year, we're sort of continuing what we did last year, though we're focusing on anti-Indigenous racism and we're focusing on anti-Black racism more specifically.
Why do you think it's important for the younger generation or youth in general to take part in something like this?
Well, I think there are a couple of benefits. One is, when the students, I interview and I select students very carefully for this class. And what many of them will say is really this is the first time they have a chance to really apply their skill sets out in the community, right? So it's really the application. They're also interested in making a difference. So that's one thing. For me, it's also a way that through my students, I can bridge the gap between the university, the town gown gap, and I think student projects are a perfect way. I think the third advantage is both for the students but also for the city. I think that it opens up students' eyes to the possibility of working in municipalities.
Just rewinding a little bit to the beginning, you had mentioned that a few years ago, one of the goals was to identify how we track progress.
Yes.
How has that been done?
Well, we had some ideas, and all our students do is they put it out, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the city has done with that.
Right.
You know, how would we know if this was working? From my perspective, more people would feel that London felt like home, that people could live their full life here, right? Could contribute in the way that, however that was, that they wanted to, that they weren't underemployed, that they could avail themselves fully of what London had to offer and fully contribute to the community. Could be the broader community or also in their smaller communities.
Thank you so much for joining me here today, Leora.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Speaking with
I
you.
really enjoyed talking with you too.
Welcome back, everyone. I have here with me 2 community champions who are part of the CDIS priority to have zero tolerance for oppression, discrimination, and ignorance. I have Nicole Kinnicky and Amber Matthews here with me. I'm just going to be asking them a few questions, if that's okay, to get your insight on your involvement with this priority. So, Nicole, let's start with you. Why is this so important to the community?
I think having discussions and at least having an opportunity for dialogue on these issues in very specific and explicit way in discussing zero tolerance for oppression and discrimination is really important in order to start building advocacy. I think that's what the community is looking for. And so I think the reason why this priority specifically is so important is for us to be able to keep that dialogue going and to be able to provide an opportunity for furthering of this work for advocacy.
Right on. And Amber?
I think I echo a lot of what Nicole said. Personally, I think this priority is really important because it deals with both kind of big and small issues. So we see some of the strategies that are aimed at dealing with, racism and discrimination, but there's also real tangible outcomes as well, working with the London Police, working with agencies that deal specifically with communities that are affected by some of these issues. And so I think I was attracted to it because I thought that it was a way in which that you could affect both like big and small change.
And that brings me to my next question. Can you just speak a little bit more about why you wanted to get involved in something like this?
Sure, I think there's a very few opportunities to kind of get involved meaningfully in a large community effort, especially around these kind of big issues. And so when I saw the call for participation, I looked at it and I looked at the work that had been done in the 2 years prior with the drafting of the strategy, and it really seemed to me that this was an effort that the city was taking seriously. And so I thought that it would be a really important way that I could give back and affect change in the community collaboratively, because it's a large strategy with a lot of working parts. But each group within itself, you have an opportunity to take on a role that allows you to affect change.
Right. And Nicole?
I think for me, as a self-identified member of the Black community here in London, this was important for me to have an opportunity to actually contribute to what I have experienced myself and what I see individuals around me, my family members and friends experiencing in the City of London, and to actually contribute toward hopefully making change. There are a lot of issues, and to our communities, I think it's nothing new. This has been our lived experience for a long time. And I know many of the discussions have really only just kind of begun with a lot of people now, but I think this has been a reality for us for a long time. So I really saw this initiative as an opportunity for me to get involved, to contribute toward making that change that I was hoping for. So.
Right, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I got involved as well, because moving from the GTA to here, it really stood out to me, and like, I have two options. I can either complain and do nothing, or do something, and doing something is better than doing nothing. So
That's right.
yeah, thanks guys. We'll have some more discussion right after this. Welcome back, everyone. So I have here with me Nicole Kinnicky and Amber Matthews, and we're just discussing priority number 2. And we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but Nicole, I'd love to hear what this priority really means to you.
I think what this priority really means to me is that it is one of them that I see becoming an actionable item. And I think Amber kind of alluded to this as well, in that the way in which we are as a group addressing it by bringing in stakeholders, bringing in community members and community leaders, and getting them involved in the dialogue, and actually finding out from them what they are doing in their anti-oppression, anti-racism work has been a really good and important part of it, for us to really be able to perhaps speak to them to find out the change that needs to happen and how they see they will be addressing these issues. So I would say that's really what I see important about it.
Yeah, for me it was really, it means a lot to me, because I see it as a really profound opportunity for people that are with less access to power to speak to people like City Council. So we saw this week when 2 members of CDIS, were delegates to City Council, and that's a real opportunity to share, like Nicole mentioned, the lived experience, and also to create a collaborative environment. As we all know, some of these issues are very political, and they're also very tense. And so, when we gather around the tables at the CDIS, it's not necessarily about politicizing the issue. It's about everyone kind of bringing their strengths to the table. And so that's why it really means a lot to me in that sense, because I see it as work that can move forward. We stay in this kind of rut a lot of the time in this work of just kind of repeating the same thing, where I'm working on this and Nicole's working on that, and we don't know that we're connected or that we have the same goals in mind. And so, bringing 30, 40 people together that share a common interest and a common goal to make London a better city, I think we can achieve a lot more.
Right, and you mentioned City Council, and I think collaborating with the city and the City Council is very important to give us an opportunity to affect real change and start driving us out of systemic oppressions, right? So yeah, thanks guys. And just a final question here. So Nicole, what would you ultimately like to see happen out of this priority?
I think what I hope to see out of this priority is actual policy change. And that's why I think in emphasizing exactly what you brought up is our connection to council and the leadership within our city, that what I'm hoping that out of this work will come real policy changes that will explicitly address the zero tolerance. You know, it's one thing to say the word zero tolerance, but to actually see it come forth in policy change, in best practices change, and how we actually do things, and also consequences for you know, the violence and trauma that happens toward marginalized groups within our city, for us to address it and to put protections in place for those individuals. That's really what I hope to see come from this. So yeah, I would definitely say the policy changes that we actually see that will address and mitigate for those will be a priority.
Fundamentally, I'd like to see us connect the dots. You know, we've seen over the last 3 months that we have issues. We have issues with police violence. We have issues with racialized communities suffering disproportionate impacts in COVID-19. You know, these are not disparate events. This is a systemic issue, and so when we kind of deal with it in piecemeal, we don't really achieve very much. And so, you know, going back to kind of some of the priorities around working with social service agencies and really making clear that systemic problems require systemic solutions. You know, you cannot address a structural problem without acknowledging the structure which is creating it. And so I think when we start to kind of be able to make clear, and not just to the people at the table, and you know, that's what I'd really like to see our group do, is to create an opportunity to take that message out into the community and show people that it's not an issue just for racialized communities to solve. And in fact, I find that it's the burden ought to be actually on the people that will hold the privilege to take a more direct and actionable role in doing that. But I don't say they don't understand. There's not a clear understanding on systemic problems, I think, not only in our city but in society. So if we could do a good job of explicating that to Londoners, but also how they can take part and how they can affect change. Because people want to live in a society in which people have opportunities and people don't suffer. You know, I genuinely have a good feeling about that. Some people are more pessimistic. I'm not one of them.
I agree. I think we need to call on those who control the mechanisms to affect this change, who are, like you mentioned, the privileged in society, to remove these barriers for these racialized groups, right? But thank you guys. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, Nicole, Amber. I look forward to seeing you again at the next CDIS meeting. Thanks for watching, everyone. On the next episode, we'll be talking about priority number 3, to connect and engage Londoners. If you want to affect change, or if you want to take part in CDIS to help make our communities better, head over to london.ca/CDIS to fill out a volunteer application, and we look forward to working with you.